Hopefully you had a chance to watch the 2016 Olympics in Rio over the past few weeks and were able to observe winners and losers, success and failures, disappointments and dreams come true. Some of the winners we expected to win did, and some of those we expected to win didn't. As you can see in the next slide featuring Missy Franklin, there were those who were successful in prior competitions but didn't do so well in the Olympics and were sorely disappointed with the outcome. My name is Melanie Tooley, and we're going to look at attribution theory and how people attribute their successes or failures. Austrian psychologist Fritz Heider developed attribution theory to explain the process by which we attribute outcomes based on internal behavior and external events. Internal attribution is the process of assigning the cause of behavior to some internal characteristics such as talent, traits, or skill, rather than to outside forces. External attribution is the process of assigning the cause of behavior to some situation or event outside of a person's control. For example, you observe a young driver in a car accident. Without knowledge of the situation, you may conclude that it was the driver's fault, assuming internal behavior such as ability or using his cell phone or he wasn't skilled at driving, when in reality it was an external force with a deer running across the road in front of him that caused the accident. Kelly's covariation model is the best known attribution theory. He developed a logical model for judging whether a particular action should be attributed to internal or external causes. The term covariation simply means that a person has more information from multiple sources than just one source. For example, Tom's behavior is laughter. Tom is laughing at a comedian. If everyone is laughing at the comedian, we would make an external attribution that Tom is laughing because he thinks the comedian is funny. On the other hand, if Tom is the only person laughing, we would assume that Tom is laughing because he's the kind of person who laughs a lot, which is an internal attribution. So what we have here is people attributing causality on the basis of correlation. This is to say that we add two things together and we assume that one causes the other. Bernard Weiner built on Heider's attribution theory to distinguish between stable and uncontrollable causes in evaluating performance. Adding this dimension, internal and external factors could either have unchanging or variable aspects. According to Weiner, when speaking of achievements, there are four factors that affect attributions: ability, effect, task difficulty, and luck. Let's look at an example. A baseball player can have a natural athletic ability, which is an internal attribute. However, the amount of time he spends practicing day in and day out in batting practice is an external attribute. Hitting a home run is a difficult task, but is attributed to an internal skill. Whereas the wind is blowing in the right direction at the right exact moment that the ball hits the bat, that is pure luck, which is an external factor. The theory of self-serving biases became popular in the 70s. Heider found that people make attributions based on their own needs and in order to maintain a higher self-esteem. Ross studied several biases that people attribute to their success or failures, but we'll look at that in a minute. First, let's define attribution. Attributions are the reasons we give for an outcome or event, which can be internal or external factors. So let's look at this. Let's imagine that you got an F on a test. You could attribute it to external factors, such as the teacher doesn't like me, the room was too hot, the test was unfair, the questions were too hard, and that would make it outside of your control externally. A person with an internal attributes would say, I didn't get enough sleep, I should have studied more for the test. Therefore, they feel that the outcome is something they could control. Sometimes these patterns can mislead us and we can end up making attributions that aren't true. For example, Cindy and Rob work together. They see each other every day, they generally get along well, but one morning Rob comes in, he's grumpy, he's short, he says something rude to Cindy. Cindy thinks, oh, he must just be having a bad day. However, Jessie is new to the company, and when she first meets Bob, if he's grumpy and is short, she thinks to herself that Bob must be a pretty mean guy. Two people the same situation, and yet Cindy and Jesse come up with completely different reasons for Rob's behavior. In psychological terms, Cindy and Jesse just assign different attributions to Bob. An attribution is the reason a person gives for why an event happened. There are errors in assigning these causes, however. The fundamental attribution error is a common trend of blaming people instead of situations, as was the case for the young man in the car wreck. We tend to blame the victim for issues that might have been out of their control. We assign blame without taking into account any information as to why. Let's take a homeless person. If you attack this homelessness as to the fact that they were lazy, he didn't try to get a job, and you attack the person without knowing why or what the situation is, you just committed the fundamental attribution error. The just world hypothesis, which assumes that judgments on performances are fair and people get the outcome they deserve. This error in logic blames the victim even when external factors are involved. Now, the self-serving bias. This is the tendency to attribute our own success to our internal ability and blame our failures on the external factors beyond our control. For example, a baseball player might claim that his grand slam was due to talent, but chalk up losing the game to a bad luck. Let's look at one more example. Cara is an Olympic runner. She's really great at it. She wins lots of races, and whenever she wins a race, she tells herself that she won because she's talented and because she trained really hard. She attributes her win to internal forces. She won because of something internally within herself that she did. On the other hand, sometimes Cara loses. When that happens, she makes external attributions. She believes that she lost because it was so hot that day, or because other racers took supplements that made them stronger. In short, the self-serving bias makes people believe that they are responsible for success, but that failure is not their fault. As a result, the self-serving bias can lead to a higher self-esteem and lower chance of depression. Of course, it can also lead people to not working to overcome real obstacles to success. For example, maybe Cara didn't train as hard as she could have before the race that she lost. If she attributes her failure to external factors, she isn't driven to train as hard as she would be if she attributes her failure to her lack of training. In communicating with others, it matters how we judge their behavior and how we judge our own behavior. We have control whether we motivate others to succeed or fail. Let's take a gymnast for an example. Let's say I have a child who loses a competition. I can assess external factors and use demotivating speech. Oh, it was too hard for you. The judges were biased. You couldn't have won against her anyway. This can make the child give up and quit trying, or tells them there's nothing they can do to improve, thus crushing any internal attributes or reasons to work harder and keep going. Or I can assess internal factors and use motivating speech, saying, you really didn't get enough sleep last night, you went to bed too late, or you really needed more practice, or you could have followed some more of the coach's suggestions. This allows the child to make mental adjustments and gives them motivation to continue trying, and lets them know they have it within themselves to make change, thus giving them power to succeed. Knowing attribution theory should keep us from jumping to conclusions. It could make us step back and assess the facts before judging someone's behavior. In other words, are they always grumpy, or is there really an external cause contributing to their behavior? It makes us look at how our own biases towards ourselves. Can I be wrong? Am I the one that's grumpy? It also helps us take responsibility for our own behavior, for our own successes and our own mistakes. To what do you attribute your success or failure? To someone else or to yourself? The Bible says in 1 Corinthians 9:24, "Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it." Hebrews 12:4 says, "Therefore let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." Sometimes you'll fail, and sometimes you'll win. But how you attribute those successes and failures will affect your future actions, and how you attribute and judge the behaviors of others can also affect your future actions and your future communication with those individuals. Thank you.